Media Options is the industry-leading domain broker specializing in domain acquisitions, high-value domain sales, and domain name consultation. As pioneers and thought leaders on the subject of the domain aftermarket and domain name value, plus through their clear domain acquisition service, Media Options offers startups and established corporations an unparalleled scope of high-value domain options, providing access to domain names and curation technologies not available elsewhere. Media Options believes in the power of a great domain name and is dedicated to helping you obtain yours. Call or email today to put a domain to work for you.
FD was built by domain investors to increase your inquiries, sales, and profit. Forget spreadsheets and archived emails. Manage your entire investment portfolio in one place using a secure and completely confidential platform. Learn more at FT.com. That's EFTY. FT.com.
Hey, Sherpa Network, welcome. Today we are delighted to host CEO and founder of Microstrategy, Michael Saylor. Most of you know him from his $30 million sale of Voice.com. He was recently in the news making waves as the first public company CEO to switch corporate dollars from US Treasury funds to Bitcoin. This will be an interesting conversation through his journey from early days of software technology, IT, domains, all the way over to recent news. Media Options CEO Andrew Rosener will be conducting the interview and we'll take it from here.
Welcome. Very, very glad to have you. This is, I believe, going to be a very exciting podcast for the domain industry. You are somewhat of a celebrity, whether you know it or not. Domain Twitter is a bit smaller than crypto Twitter, and I know you've taken a recent liking to crypto Twitter, and reading it and the commentary, and there's some just brilliant minds there. But you're also famous in the domain Twitter world, so I am excited to sort of dig in deeper and get inside your head and understand the way you think about domain names, because you've got a pretty impressive portfolio of generic domain names that you've owned for a number of years, and you're clearly visionary in obtaining those. So I think our audience would love to hear about your mental model and the framework and the way you've thought about these things over the years. What was your aha moment? Well, first off, is there anything you want to add in terms of your intro and your background? And I mean, sorry, I keep diverting, but I want to give a little hat tip to Raul and Pomp. You did an amazing interview with both of them on Real Vision on a Pomp podcast. And so I take a lot for granted from listening to both of those things that I've already learned from you. And so I don't want to detract from my listeners, but I also don't want to, be too redundant. And so I highly encourage everybody to go listen to those interviews on realvision.com and the Pomp podcast. You can find that on YouTube, and we will link to those in the show notes. But is there, anything else that we should sort of shine a light on?
Why don't I say things that I didn't say on those podcasts that are relevant to the domain industry? And let me start with one observation. I was always a big science fiction fan from very early on, from first grade. And by the time I was in third grade, I was a massive fan of Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, and Isaac Asimov. And so I read everything they wrote. I eventually, tripped into more modern science fiction. And I read, hold on a second, I'm putting on my do not disturb. Okay. Then I read modern works by William Gibson, Neuromancer, as he introduced the concept of cyberspace. And that was fascinating to me. And that led me to have an interest in science and technology. And I ended up getting a degree in astronautical engineering, and I studied spaceship design at MIT. And there I met a lot of science fiction fans, and I saw the creation of the internet. my fraternity was like the first place they wired for Ethernet, and I watched them develop Kerberos and Ethernet and the internet, and they put workstations in there, and we just thought this was magic stuff. And I was next to a lot of the computer scientists that invented a lot of the foundations of what is modern internet, and that always had an impact on me. I think that with regard to domain names, the aha moment for me was we first started getting email. And when we got email, I'd started a company, Microstrategy, and we needed an email address, right? This is before the internet, right?
Yeah.
And the first use of domains were for email. They weren't for websites. And so we were going to, of course, get microstrategy.com. And so we got microstrategy.com, and I typed in Saylor at microstrategy.com. There's a great quote by Saint Exupery, I guess, about design. When there's nothing left to take away, it's a perfect design, or something to that effect, right? And so I always loved elegance. It just, I don't know. You ever see a 3-year-old that knows how to dance, just knows how to dance? I've seen 3-year-olds that know how to dance. It's genetically encoded in them. Yep. And then I've seen 30-year-olds that took 22 years of dance lessons and they still can't dance.
Yes.
And you can't teach it. It's just in you. And so from a very early age, I just appreciated elegance of design. So when you start typing your email address and you write, someone says, your email address is going to be Michael Saylor at microstrategycorporation.com. I think, no. M. Saylor at MicroStrategy Corporation. No. Saylor at MicroStrategy Corporation. No. Saylor at microstrategy.com. Okay. But then I said, is there any company named strategy.com? I'm like, I think I'd like that one. And so I sent my lawyers off hunting around to see if where was strategy.com. And obviously in the early day, you could get these things for like $13. And if you were smart, we got some good ones for whatever the $13, because we just figured this is cool. I mean, why wouldn't you? But we didn't get strategy.com for $13. But I think probably back in the day for like $25,000 or $50,000, it used to be people thought $25,000 for a domain name was a lot of money.
A lot of money. Yeah.
You would see engineers go, I got whatever, hope.com, and I sold it for $27,000 and I got myself a car. I was one of the guys on the other side. Like, I was not like mega businessman. We did $4 million in business in 1994. But $4 million a year was enough that you could slurp up, a number of $25,000 assets. So I don't know the exact date, but between 94 and 2000, we started getting interested, and we got strategy.com. And I still have the email address Saylor at strategy.com. And I thought that was kind of cool. And, because I typed, by the way, I just thought the tyranny of the keyboard was an issue. So I didn't want to type more characters than I needed to type. And it's pretty obvious to me that strategy.com was better than microstrategy.com. So then we went on and we thought, well, everybody was .com back then. We didn't think about .io or .it, .whatever. I mean, those came later, or .de or fill in the blank. I thought, well, it's kind of obvious. Everything's a .com behind it. There's a word in front of it. We're English. I happen to, I spoke English. I didn't speak Portuguese. I didn't speak Chinese. I wouldn't know how to buy up all the Portuguese, German, French translations if I wanted to. By the way, fast forward 20 years, English is the most important language in the world economy. And over the next 20 years, it emerged to be the 800-pound gorilla of all languages. So English and .com became the dominant logical domains for economic commerce. I was lucky.
If you want to be global, it was the only choice. You want to be global, there is no other choice.
I would say I was lucky to be born an American, speaking English, and come of age at the time I did. Coming out of MIT when the internet was getting invented, and starting a company when email was getting commercialized. Just right place, right time. Enough money to be able to buy up some stuff, but not enough that I was distracted chasing after other macroeconomic issues. So right place, right time. And
but you intuitively understood that shorter was better. You intuitively understood the function of these things, what they were going to represent, and that if you wanted to conduct commerce online, you needed a place for people to find you, and it needed to be intuitive.
It started with give someone a memorable email address. Like what could be more memorable than Michael@strategy.com or Saylor? Michael's even better than Saylor, right? Because Saylor, there's multiple.
They can mistype, exactly.
Well, there were these hurdles. Can you type it? That's the first hurdle. Boy, that's a big hurdle. A lot of people have domains and they have complicated characters and you couldn't type them. And the second hurdle is, can you spell it? And so a name like Hope, or a name like Mike, or a name like Wisdom, it's likely you're not going to misspell it. And then the third hurdle is, can you remember it? Because I want to meet you in a business meeting or whatever. I want you to be able to contact me. It's the principle that was the precursor to this is vanity license plates and vanity phone numbers. It's like, well, Mike, what's your phone number? I'm like 703-444-4444. Oh, I get that.
Yeah.
Or better yet, 444-444-4444. Right? People paid money for
a lot of money. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because I have a client that is their business, is vanity phone numbers. And those things are still selling for huge money, huge. And, people don't blink an eyelash. It sort of just fits into the premise that I believe, we're still really in the infancy of this whole internet thing. And, we got hired by, you probably remember Hooked on Phonics. Remember Hooked on Phonics? Works for me. Dial 1-800-ABCDEFG. So we got hired by, they went bankrupt. They got sold to a PE firm. They stripped out the assets. They hired us to sell the HOP.com domain name. I sold that to a French airline called Hop. And then I had this 1-800 number. They had a whole portfolio of 800 numbers. But the best one was the 1-800-ABCDEFG. And that was a lot of fun to try and sell. And ultimately, I sold it to a lawyer. And he said, I'm going to slap this thing on a billboard. Everybody that drives by at 65 miles an hour, they're going to remember 1-800-ABCDEFG. It's very easy to remember.
You've only got 2 seconds.
Yeah.
For example, you couldn't market a phone number 973-1943, because people would crash their car. Yeah. So if you, and by the way, it's like a high frequency thing. I'm going to give you 1 second. And I want you to remember this. Me at Hope. Yeah. Something like that. You're
not gonna forget.
In the early 90s, these domains were handles to email. And so that was the first usage. And we didn't contemplate any other, but that was enough because we thought email was going to replace surface mail, and we wanted a handle. And then around 94, people started working on this internet thing. And by 96, it was kind of, I'm sitting in Northern Virginia, and, UUNet was coming out of Northern Virginia, and, and all the domain registries. And so some of the earlier, more innovative people were just social friends of my friends, and they'd come to my office, and they're pitching me on this internet, this web thing.
Yeah.
I started looking, and I realized, so now Microstrategy.com can be our website. And then I'm like, well, I got another reason to type it. And that was before Google or anything else, right? It's like, how do you find this thing? So now domains became a handle to a website. And I think that kind of kicked me from low gear to higher gear. I'm like, okay, now I want to go buy. And then like over the, I sent guys off on a hunt, and I was like, find every English name that I can put a business on. So by 1995, it was very evident to me that these are awesome assets. So we went and we bought Angel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Angel, like it's like godlike, right? I mean, I couldn't like God, but I mean, I thought Angel was better than God. God's a little bit presumptuous, whereas Angel, not much. And then we bought Alarm, and then we bought Alert, and then we bought Strategy, and we bought Wisdom, and we bought Courage, and we bought Hope. We bought Glory. So we're buying positive English words with a connotation. Then we started working on names, and I thought, go buy Michael. I'm Michael, so I bought Michael, and then and they come to me and they go, hey, we actually found a dude that'll sell us Mike. You want? I'm like, yeah, I want that. But I'm lazy. My 4-letter word, that Michael, and a lot of people can't spell Michael. They can spell Mike. Yeah. And it's like 3 fewer keystrokes. So we bought Emma and William. William is my father's name. So I was buying my name. I was buying my father. We bought Frank. And then we bought Arthur.
Much to the chagrin of one of the most iconic domain investors, Frank Schilling. I'm sure it's been much to his chagrin that you've got Frank.com.
I'm waiting for the right offer. Maybe we'll go into business together, like creating cybernetic AI Franks. And I think then we picked up Speaker. I thought Speaker was kind of cool, and and then they worked. Those were all the primary ones: single words, either 1 syllable or 2 syllable, positive connotation names, or characteristics or ideas. And then we started picking up like secondary things, like MicroStrategy in every single domain: MicroStrategy.de, MicroStrategy.fr, MicroStrategy.it. And then we buy all these other things. And we bought iDream. We thought, I was waiting for Apple, right, to come and have an iPhone, iDream, something. As you put other qualifiers, my wisdom, my space, these become secondary, and you could do some, but I'm just not so enthusiastic about them. They're just a lot harder. I left out Voice. We bought Voice. And I don't know, we might have spent $100,000-$200,000. I don't know exactly, but it was not enough money that by the time I bought it, did it even register with me? Yeah. Like the sum total of all of these domains, if we spent $2 million on all of them together, I don't think it was $3 million. It might've been $2 million divided into 15 or 20 awesome ones. So $100,000 for a piece for the awesome ones. And then picked up thousands of secondary ones, primarily just to keep people from squatting on cyberspace near us and then rerouting traffic. Yep.
And so, you spent $1-2 million buying up the 20, absolute lights out, top notch names, tier 1, right? You turn around, you sell voice.com, $30 million. What is that? Now, 20 years later? 20 years later.
Exactly turn around. And I bought it and I hodled it. I held it in my treasury on the balance sheet. And 20 years later, I finally found someone motivated. But our intent was not to sell these things. That's not why we bought them.
No, clearly, right? You built out angel.com, you turned that into a commercial business, you sold that.
To develop them as businesses, and that's what we did for the 20 years. So for example, if we roll the clock back, we built a business on strategy.com. We back in the late 90s, and it was personalized intelligence. you go and you subscribe, you give us your interest in stocks or weather. It was like we did personalization before Google and Apple, 20 years before they did. So like I would say, Andrew, where do you live? What stocks do you follow? What subjects are you interested in? I'll generate personal news, personal finance, personal weather, personal traffic, right? We had all those ideas, and we launched a business around it, and we had some interesting success with it. Then we, back in like 98, 99, I had a friend, and she told me the story of someone breaking into her house. And she lived in Arlington, Virginia. And she said, someone broke into my house. She ran into her room. She locked the door, and she was like hostage in her room for 2 hours. You know, and this is, I'm trying to remember, did we have mobile phones? We didn't really have a lot of mobile phones. Maybe she had a phone and she called a friend who eventually came two hours later, and then the burglar or whatever left her home. But it was a very horrific story. And I started thinking, why can't we actually create home alarm systems, plug them into the internet, so that if she was actually in her house, she could have just put, a motion detector would have gone off. By the way, wouldn't you want a motion detector to go off and tell you while you're at the office that someone's in your house before you go home? And so I had this idea that there's the internet thing, and then there's alarms, and the alarms are not on the internet. And okay, this is not it's kind of a straightforward thing for a techie to think, put the alarm on the internet.
Yeah.
And that was the genesis of the idea for alarm.com. I thought, we're going to create a company that's going to allow people to take all of their heat, fire detectors, motion detectors, glass breakage detectors, alarm systems, plug it in the internet, tie it, use the ideas we had of like alerts to a personal alert. Remember the word alert, by the way, that all ties in. Alerts to your phone if someone goes in your house based upon an alarm system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we created alarm.com, and we launched a business doing home automation. And this is 1999, okay? And, you can read headlines about Amazon doing it last week, and Google doing it last week, and Apple doing it last week. Okay, so, by the way, this is a segue. Just because you have the idea first, and you have $20 million or 10 or whatever to put behind, doesn't mean you're going to win the market.
Yeah. Being early is just about the same as being wrong.
You have to have the
idea. But the underlying theme here that ties all this together is that, I would argue you've been incredibly visionary across all of these fields that you've sort of dabbled in. And, from what I understand from listening to some of the other interviews, at some point you just said, look, focus is my key. But, what I want to dive into is like, what was it that, what was the intuition that gave you that vision of course we should be tying home alarm systems to the internet. Of course we should be creating these, personalized, call it AI, call it service, alert systems. What was it? Why did you see that stuff? And then, I want to segue into, some of the more recent stuff.
I was always a technologist first, right? By first grade, I was reading science fiction. When I went to MIT, I got another degree while I was getting a degree in aeronautics and astronautics. And the second degree was in the history of science. Mm-hmm. And so I spent a lot of time reading about how science, radiation, antibiotics, aviation, railroads, transportation networks, communication networks, oil, energy, how all steel, guns, germs, and steel, that's stuff that got popular. That's all I thought about, from a very early age. What's the impact of all these things on civilization and economics and the like? So it was it was baked into me. And of course, MIT does stand for Institute of Technology. I mean, everybody I went to school, like we all thought nonstop about how the world was going to change based on technology. So that was
But on that point, I want to push back a little bit because, our business, Media Options, we're a domain brokerage firm. And what I do all day long is, and we really only focus on, let's say, the top 2% of .com domain names. And so by definition, all day long, every day, I'm speaking with the smartest, brightest, most successful entrepreneurs, investors, executives worldwide. Everyone from, Amazon to, a venture-backed startup. And I got to say, a lot of these guys, they went to Stanford, they went to MIT, they went to Harvard, they went to Yale. Very few of them understand the implications of some of these technologies, be it Bitcoin, be it domain names, be it any of these sort of regime changes in technology, paradigm shifts. Very few of them actually grasp the implications, and even less of them do anything about it.
Okay, so Andrew, that reminds me of something I forgot to say. While I was reading science fiction, I also stumbled across fantasy. And the most famous magazines were Science Fiction and Fantasy magazine. I think that a lot of people are linear thinkers and engineering thinkers, and they just think about the engineering implications, and they don't think about the fantastical implications. So they don't have the creativity. And I illustrated this in my book, The Mobile Wave, and I wrote that in 2012, and I wrote about what happens when a product or service dematerializes to software. And I think that if you're only a science fiction fan, and if you're only an engineer, you're living in a Newtonian universe, and it's constraining. Okay, but here's the idea. You're not a technologist. You toss a baseball on a field. It's subject to the universe you've grown up in. There's friction, there's gravity. The baseball falls to the turf after about 100 to 300 feet. That's the conventional thinker. Now I convert the baseball, the entire exercise, into software, but I think with a engineer's focus. Call that science fiction. And I think, well, if I was tossing that baseball in outer space, that would just keep going. That's going to go around the Earth forever. Right? In a ballistic orbit, subject to all the gravitational pull around it. Okay, that's more interesting. But Andrew, if I read fantasy, and if I read all the fantastical things written along with science fiction, my mind opens up a bit, and I say, I'm going to toss that baseball, and it's going to convert itself into a dragon, and that dragon's going to burn down my enemy, and it's going to flip into 1,000,000 white doves, fly circles around me. They're going to land, and they're going to sing a beautiful symphony by Mozart while I bask in the glow of fabulous. Okay, that's fantasy. Okay, it's a magic baseball. It's not constrained by the laws of time and space and anything. So when you think about everything as dematerializing into software, first you say, what can I do from an engineering point of view? Then you say, what if it was a magic baseball? And so I guess most people that are conventional thinkers, well, they can't imagine throwing the baseball through a vacuum. And if they can, if they're just an engineer, and if they didn't study the liberal arts, and they didn't read the works of Tolkien and think about elves and dwarves and the like, they can't really conceptualize the rest. And by the way, there's an important idea in the world of fantasy. Okay, and it's very relevant to domains. And you caused me to think about it. You triggered it. It's in the world of fantasy, there's the concept of demons, and a demon will come and it'll kill you, burn your town down, take everything you have, make your life living hell. And the most important thing is don't mention its name. What's the name of the devil, right? Every demon's got a name. You summon the demon with the name. They're always listening. If you know the name of the demon, you can summon it. If you don't know the name of the demon, you can never summons it, and it will be listening, but Lord help you if you mention that name. And so what's in a name, right? We're back to this idea, and this becomes really important in the modern world of high cardinality search. And I'll give you the example, like on Alexa. You know, we started with a domain name as a handle for email. You're going to type it and you're looking at it on a business card. And then it became a handle for a website and you're going to type it into a web browser. What happens when I have no hands? And I tell Alexa, Google domain name blank, Google MicroStrategy, Google Michael Saylor, right? I have no hands. I'm speaking. Okay, so speech is a technology.
Well, you eliminate the need for Google if you have a name that's recognizable, right? You just cut Google out and say, Siri, take me to apple.com. Siri, take me to strategy.com. Siri, take me to glory.com or hope.com, right? I think the semantically meaningful and very easy to say, very difficult to confuse, these types of domain names become critically important to verbal search.
I use the phrase, there's a word for that.
Yeah.
Right? There's a word for that. Learn your words. And if you're talking to an AI, you could say, how many words in the English language? There's a lot. The English language has more words than any other language in the history of the world, and we keep adding words. So
is that true?
That is true. That is true. You can Google that. There's no there's no language with more words than the English language. The English language became the language of science because we invented so many words, and you need so many specialized words
to describe.
And it's a very important reason why the English language is, if I had to guess, 80% of all the economic value on earth flows through the English language, and that's meaningful for domains. We come back to that in a second. I could talk for hours about English and the like, but the more important point is, I'm talking to Alexa and there's 500,000 words. Okay, I have to remember the word. There are companies that have names, and their names are misspellings.
They try to get cute. They try to get cute, and they think that they're saving themselves money, but over time they're just costing themselves, an irreparable, it's an irreparable leak in the dam.
Let's take Lyft, right?
Yeah.
Is Lyft L-I-F-T or is Lyft L-Y-F-T? And if you're talking to Alexa and you say, I'm interested in Lyft, or I'm interested, I want a Lyft, it's like you created an ambiguity, and then now you have to spell it. Now imagine
you've created a hurdle. You've created this huge hurdle, but this is lost on so many people. They don't understand that you say, hey, Alexa, take me to Lyft.com. That isn't going to take you to L-Y-F-T. It's going to take you to L-I-F-T.com, right?
And now, Andrew, let's go back to a basic principle. How many people on the earth today studied English in school? Because it's got to be at least 1 billion, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and if there's probably 1 billion people that speak English fluently. And then if you're anybody else, right, 7 billion people on earth, if you're anybody else that wants money, you got to learn English. Okay, one of the basic principles is English is the ultimate.
It's probably more than 1 billion people. If you think about all of the people in the Philippines and India and China, those 3 countries alone, never mind Africa, where, I don't know what the percentages are, but it's got to be a very high percentage that learn English in order to engage with this global economy.
Yeah, and I've traveled everywhere in the world, and I do business just about everywhere in the world where there's money, right? I mean, serious amounts of money. I mean, I don't sell cheap software; it's expensive. But where people can afford to buy it, we do business. And here is what I have observed. if I go to a non-English speaking country, those people that speak English fluent, if you're a cab driver and you speak English fluently, you get paid triple. Like, I'll hire you for triple what the cab driver that speaks the local language pays. If you're any kind of white collar worker and you speak English, you're, in China, the differential between someone that knows how to code software and speaks English and someone that knows how to code software and doesn't speak English is easily a factor of 2. Maybe, so if every kid in America.
My assistant makes 3 times what the average wage would be for her, demographic, simply because she speaks English well. And otherwise, she's going to do the same job as somebody else that doesn't require an English speaker, and she's going to earn a third.
I mean, we could, I don't know the exact number, but I think that the uplift is somewhere between 2x and 3x on average everywhere on earth. In some places it could be 5x to 10x if you're in difficulty. And so imagine if we told every kid in America that if you spoke Spanish, we would double your wages at age 22. Yeah. What if I told you I was going to triple your salary at age 22 if you spoke Spanish?
Yeah.
What do you think happens next? Right?
A lot of people speak Spanish.
By the way, I live in Miami Beach, and there's an economic benefit to speaking Spanish in Miami Beach because you can manage and acquire labor and products, services, products in English and Spanish. You can hire people to speak Spanish and they'll work for you. Yeah. Or you can sell to people. So on both sides of the transaction, you speak Spanish, and there's a lot of Americanos that grew up speaking English and they make Spanish their second language because they have an academic incentive. So English becomes that incredibly powerful thing. Now, there's got to be a billion, but maybe there's billions of people that have taken it. By the way, here's another one. I have a Saylor.org, free education for the world. That's my channel. If you go to Saylor.org, we give away education. We're trying to give away a college degree to the entire earth for free. We have 500,000 students so far have come. Wow. 70,000 students a quarter. And what do you think's the single most popular course we offer, Andrew?
English is a second language.
English, ESL. English is a second language. You nailed it. The most popular course in the world across everywhere. Everybody wants to learn English as a second language because they want the money.
The economic benefit.
And I could boil it down to, if you sell anything in English, you're going to get paid more. If you're purchasing anything in English, you're going to buy it for less. English is the most liquid market. Now,
just to highlight that very clearly with domain names, I want to give an example, and then I want to come back to one of the first principles that we were discussing. So, Spanish word, right? So Spanish, second largest, or even it might even be most spoken language in the world. But certainly not the greatest economic benefit. But, a Spanish domain name, you can have, we owned Vida.com, V-I-D-A, Vida.com, life in Spanish. Very powerful
good
word.
If you're a Spaniard.
Pretty good, right? Sold that for a lot of money, but at best, a 10th, or it could have been 100th of what the value of life.com is. Even ignoring the IP that's been created by Life Magazine and the media enterprise. But, it just is what it is. The economic benefit of life.com is at a minimum 10x and potentially 100x greater than the economic benefit of the same exact word in Spanish. Both have 4 letters, very easy to spell. They, consonant, vowel, all the same attributes other than one is Spanish and one is English. Yeah, I want to come back to this idea of vaporization of everything, because I believe fundamentally my thesis on the value of domain names is that domain names are the proxy for commercial real estate on the internet. And you said something about how you take everything and basically you take it from its physical form, vaporize it, turn it into software, and you're creating, you're unlocking just tremendous amounts of value in attributes that didn't previously exist. And so I think, we're witnessing this implosion of commercial real estate. And I believe, whether you agree or not, that that value that's being, displaced from commercial real estate is being replaced in the digital real estate and in the digital economy. What do you think? Do you think that same logic that you're using from, physical economy to, software economy, does that apply to domain names? Is it the physical real estate being vaporized into digital real estate?
Okay, Andrew, I would use the word dematerialize because I like it when my superheroes dematerialize and they walk through walls.
Yes.
And like when they vaporize, it makes me a bit nervous.
Yeah, negative connotation.
But I think that the theme for the last 30 years, but certainly for the past 10 years, is the dematerialization of everything. And so Apple can be explained as the dematerialization of every mobile device, your camera, your phone,
yes,
your video recorder, your television. They're all just your books. They're all your magazines. They're dematerializing onto an Apple device. And Facebook is the dematerialization of your social relationships.
Exactly.
The conversion of an intangible into a tangible in the form of software. And you see this, Amazon is the dematerialization of the retail storefront.
Yes.
Right into the Amazon store. Bitcoin is the dematerialization of bricks of gold, and then digital gold, and then just anything that's a store of value. Property as value dematerializing into coin. Domains are the dematerialization of, right now, commercial real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't, if you look at commercial real estate or commercial real estate, for the most part, dematerializing into domains. And if you take an example, obviously, you see 90% of the retail stores going away, and you have to find them on cyberspace. And everybody just thinks I can just go find them at Amazon. In order for Amazon to dematerialize all of those retailers, they had to enter all those categories. So any category that Amazon couldn't enter legally, there's a lot of categories that they can't enter it legally or technically or logistically, then those exist as their own businesses, and they have not been eaten by Amazon. But if Amazon could do it, they would do it, and that's definitely their intent. Now, if you look at just what's happened in the past 6 months, we're going through what I call a virtual wave. And that's what comes after the mobile wave. And the virtual wave is the dematerialization of most of our traditional sales, marketing, and services techniques in the world. If it could be dematerialized, it's getting dematerialized. So in our business, 80% of our marketing got dematerialized to either streaming on-demand videos on the website, or it got dematerialized to Zoom. And so Zoom is the equivalent of dematerialized sales. I'm having a meeting with you one-on-one.
Yep.
But dematerialized marketing is like, you're going to take this, record this, upload it to the web, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people are going to have a meeting with the two of us. They're going to be sitting in the room. So, the idea that you're going to, 3 years ago, you might have invited me to Lisbon so that I could give a speech in front of 500 people in a room, and it would have cost everybody $500,000 to participate in that. And this year, you're going to invite me to a 1.5 hour conversation that cost us both a nickel, and you're going to publish it, and maybe it'll stream to 87,000 people, and we're just keeping the marketing money. However,
the value creation of that is just, that's an entire conversation in and of itself, but it's just like, okay, so, you didn't fly. I didn't have to pay for, you to come as a speaker, cover your costs. We, all these people didn't have to buy a ticket, come sit in the room. We weren't limited by space. We weren't limited by time. It was like all of this stuff just got dematerialized and instantly created just an immense amount of value.
And now the question is, how do my customers get to me if I can't go face to face to them, if I can't have a symposium, if I can't go to a trade show, can't knock on their door? And by the way, the first answer is, oh yeah, maybe I ought to do some of this YouTube stuff, or maybe I ought to do some Google stuff or some Facebook stuff. But let me tell you, Andrew, I have spent $20 million in a matter of 12 months. I've blown through $20 million buying Facebook and Google ads and got nothing.
Yeah.
Blown $20 million into the toilet, right? Like the amount of money I spent buying digital advertising, it's horrific and painful. And then I start thinking, well, I can just post stuff on YouTube, but what if they take it down?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
so is Bank of America, or is any brand, is Amazon going to use YouTube and Google as their distribution channel? And the answer is, you need to own, using someone else as your distribution channel is
Terrible
like,
idea.
is like paying for a day-by-day, week-by-week lease on someone else's real estate to set up your pop-up lemonade stand.
Yes. You
And
don't own the data. You don't own the relationship. You can be turned off at any time. Welcome to the cancel culture, right? It's like all of these things are dovetailing, into my thesis. It's like you want to build a brand. All these influencers, like, okay, great. You got 100,000 followers on Instagram or on Twitter or whatever it might be. That's great, right? Tomorrow morning you wake up and they just shut you off because they didn't like what you had to say, right? Somebody complained and that's it. You're over. And now what, right? Now, if you were taking those people and you were driving them to a property that you own, at least a good portion of them are going to be sticky. And now you have their contact. You got an email address. You got, the data. You got the relationship. They know where to find you when you get turned off.
I think people have rediscovered the criticality of owning their own domain. If you're going to do business,
COVID was good for that.
If you're going to do business in the virtual age, you have to do it. You have to sell, market, and service all your product and all your value proposition through your own domain.
Yes.
And you need the email of the customer. Email has become paramount, more important than ever, because you can bypass every other mediator: Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, everybody, LinkedIn, everybody under the sun can cut you off. But if you have the email and you have that relationship, they can't cut you off. So now you just realize, much to your horror, that if you've got a corporate name that no one can spell, no one can remember, and no one can type, then your customers can't find you. It's like taking your bank branch and putting it on the panhandle of Alaska at the end of a road, lacking that last bridge to get.
Or let's put an obstacle course in front of the front door at Walmart, right? Like, here, we're going to let you park about 1 kilometer away, and then we're going to create an obstacle course before you're able to enter the door. How many of your shoppers you're going to lose?
I think it was always evident that Walmart was a 20th century name and brand, because they spelled it WAL-MART. And so if you were to ask a focus group of 100 people to go to walmart.com, they would all spelled it differently. Some with the dash,
Totally.
little curve, some with the space, some with
double L.
Dash. And so eventually they realized they should just go with WALMART. But even that's not nearly as good as picking, because Walmart is not a name. Now I want to go back to a point we skipped over. When your first grade teacher spanked you for misspelling your words, and then your second grade teacher spanked you for misspelling your words, and then you got that 12 years in a row, how many hours do you think have been invested in this civilization to teach the current 1 billion richest people to speak English how to spell?
Yeah.
Would you care to actually estimate By the way, let's turn it around.
8 hours a day, 12 years. It's a lot of hours.
Those billion people spent 2,000, well, let's say 1,000 hours a year times a billion. So they spent 1 trillion hours times 12.
Yeah.
So by the way, maybe times 16, but let's say times 12. 12 trillion hours were spent figuring out how to spell the name properly. And then I used to get a kick out of these idiot marketing consultants, and they would come in and their idea was, yeah, your name is strategy, but we can't trademark strategy because it's been in the English language for 500 years and it's written in 100 million billion books. So we're going to spell it STRATEGII.
Yeah.
I'm like, are you thinking? You
Just
idiot.
Leave.
You idiot. Yes, it's in 1 billion books, and 1 trillion hours got spent teaching everyone with money how to spell it this way. And you want me to launch a company, and I will not name the companies, but Andrew, you can go and find all the companies who came up with these unique
They're cute names.
Cute names, misspelled. But what you're doing is you're fighting against 12 trillion hours
Uphill
of
battle.
indoctrination. And you have, what you're saying, it's very offensive.
Flip that, right? It's like, if you launch strategy.com, staying with that example, you're a household name on day one. Day one, every single human being on earth that speaks the English language knows your brand.
Okay,
you're a household name.
Now, Andrew, I want to tell you something else funny. This is like, it's just so obvious in my court. If you'd asked me at age 3, does it make sense to misspell the name of the word so I can market on it? I would be like, no, not so obvious. But listen, think about this for a second. I used to get in these fights with these marketing consultants. Like, someone wants to spend $100,000 to tell you how to misspell your brand and trademark it. And by the lawyers would back them up. Like, okay, get the lawyers out of my face.
The same guy will say, you are out of your mind to spend $100,000 to buy strategy.com. You must be out of your mind. You can't spend $100,000 with me to misspell it.
And then spend $100 million on an ad campaign to market a misspelling of an English word. But Andrew, I just want to tell you, like this is the ultimate irony. That was before, I knew it was a bad idea when you had to type it, right? Because 95% of the people can't type, disambiguation, It's hard to type complicated words, and it's really hard to type words that are misspelled. You have to look at them and type because you're learning them for the first time.
Yes.
But this is the joke, Andrew. Like, this is the big one, right? This is the crippling one. When Apple and Google got smart enough and Microsoft finally got their software to be magical, the software won't let you misspell words.
Yeah.
So I start typing your misspelled, effed up brand, and it keeps auto-correcting it back to the right English.
Yeah, do it 3 times, you just get there.
But sometimes I just can't get there, Andrew.
Yeah, I can't give up.
Try on your little mobile phone, typing a misspelling into the web browser, and it keeps kicking you out. And so these guys outsmarted themselves by a long shot because, and by the way, think about it. If there's 500,000 words in the English language, you really got to invent a new word. I've seen companies, I'm not going to name them because I don't want to embarrass anybody. I've seen companies that actually took a positive English word that was a virtue, and they misspell it like in some cute way so that they can trademark it. Yeah. If you go on Google and you type in the word properly, you get 175 million hits. It hits, it resonates. If you go on Google and you type their name the way they spell it, well, half time Google tries to autocorrect you and take you to the other place, right? Wrong. Because
did you mean?
You must have made a mistake trying to go there, right? You must have made a mistake. but if you say no and you deny and you misspell it and you type it, you get 1.7 million hits, which means that the word is 100 times less popular and these are companies with $1 billion of revenue behind them, or billions of dollars of revenue. It's like it's like the brilliance of I have a name that is impossible to pronounce. He who you cannot pronounce. Well, that's real great, but how am I supposed to market you on my radio show?
Yeah.
You know?
So this is a great segue into voice.com. Easy name to spell, just phenomenal, massive implications from telecom to, giving people a social voice, which is ultimately what it's being used for now or will be. So many different avenues to go down to commercialize that name. When you sold voice.com a little over a year ago, when the announcement came out, we were actually all, us being the domain industry here in Lisbon, we were celebrating NamesCon, the annual domain conference. And Frank Schilling, the guy I mentioned earlier, who's probably jealous he doesn't have frank.com, was up on stage with somebody from GoDaddy. And, they started talking about the voice.com sale. And as Frank so correctly said, the only way to sell a domain name for $30 million is to say no to 25 million. And so I want to understand your mental model around value. How do you assign a numerical value to a domain name? I want to, first as a seller, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about, flip it on you and talk about it as a buyer.
Interesting clarification or an inside fact. I didn't say no to 25 million. I said no to 22 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the exact number. And
equally impressive.
And the way I said it was, I won't take 22 million. My number's 30 million, but I will talk to you and explain to you. And so that, at the $22 million point, I agreed to meet with the buyer and explain to them why it was worth more. My second observation is again, we don't really buy these things to sell these things. We buy these things to build a business on these things. So it's not our idea to sell them. I'd much rather commercialize them. But
when somebody throws 22 million on the table, you have to make a decision of, what is this thing worth to me? What's the opportunity cost?
Yeah, when we think about, what kind of business could be built on these things and how valuable they will over time, one of my most simple frameworks is, first you start with the economic density in the English language compared to every other language. And I think the conclusion is, if you stack up all the languages, 70 to 80% of the economic density in the world is in English. It is. And by the way, if you look at there's this Westernet, which is Western Europe, United States, English, US dollars convertible into euros, running on American US technology, the internet, TCP/IP, right? Dominated by big tech. That Westernet is something on the order of 75% of everything on Earth, right? And then there's like China, they got the China net.
Yeah.
And then so that everything kind of, falls off. So first of all, you look at that, and English is the surrogate for the Westernet. The second thing you ask is, what's the economic density in the actual domain .com versus .de? And that's another long tail where I think 75, you have to look at the economic density of everything flowing.
We've done the math. By our estimates and by our, the criteria that we're evaluating, we say, I'm looking at names that most people would argue are worth $25,000 or $50,000 or more, right? And everything else is sort of circumstance. And we believe there's roughly 50,000 domain names that have that inherent value. That's it, 50,000. 8 billion people on Earth. I don't know how many businesses. 50,000 English domains, which have an inherent value.
Yeah, it's not that much. I mean, you're right. There aren't that many that are really valuable, and that's because once you discard, or once you focus upon the 80% that's English, and then you realize something like 80% is in the .com domain because of Google.com and Amazon.com and
Trillions of dollars that have
right.
been ingrained into the public.
Right. And you realize that's the gravitational pull, and then you count the number of clicks and the amount of traffic going through those .com domains. Now the question is, to the left of the .com, what's the word? Mm-hmm. And common sense says you want it to be a short word with positive connotation that's spellable. Yes. And so it's either an idea, or it's a place, or it's a thing, or it's a person, and michaeljsaylor.com, not nearly so valuable. Saylor.com, a lot more valuable, but Michael.com, Michael is like either the first or the second most popular name for men. By the way, when God is busy, when he's busy in heaven, Michael takes over. Michael's the archangel in the entire Christian ethos. He's the number 2 guy in heaven. It's a pretty important, it's an important name 2,000 years ago. It's been an important name, and it translates as the most important name in every other language, right? And there's Michelangelo, and there's Michael Jordan. There's a lot of Michael Jackson. There's a lot of Michaels, but ultimately Michael the Archangel is pretty important. And so, and Emma, the ultimate matchmaker in the Jane Austen book, is like every girl grew up thinking Emma, she's my hero, right? So you want a name that everybody remembers, it resonates with everybody, and it's positive. Yes. By the way, I think, as an aside, when we sold Voice for $30 million, I think we beat it was like sex.com that was 11 million or something. Yeah. I was like, I'd rather sell Voice than sell sex. Totally. Right? I get why it went for so much, but you couldn't have sold sex.com to a legitimate global 2000 company with $100 billion balance sheet. Yeah. Disney's not. And
at the end of the day, I'd argue that it's overpriced because as ubiquitous as the word sex is, and as, ultimately what you're trying to do is create, an emotional response with any of these branding and marketing tactics, right? So, it does that, but very hard to commercialize, right? Porn is free. I mean, very few people paying for it. So tough names, I think, to justify that price.
The issue is what brand could you put? Domains are real estate and cyberspace, and they're really like a block on Central Park in Manhattan, right? But the thing that you realize if you travel around the world, you start by thinking every state is equal to every other state, and I got to have a salesperson in every city in America. And then you go to New York and you realize that half of everything in the country is in New York City. Okay, you don't really. If half of your sales force was in New York and the other half was spread around everywhere else, that would be economically rational. And if you look at the value of real estate, it's like, half of all the real estate value is in New York City. So this is like owning, all of New York, on Central Park, if you own, some of these words. And if you go back to your 50,000 words, right, there's probably like 50,000 blocks, or maybe your 50,000 words are like the most valuable one block in London, New York, separate, the most valuable cities. Now, I'm going to give you a more technical way to value these things, the way that I do it.
Great. That's what I want to hear.
You give me a word, voiceofthepeople.com. And I go and I start to Google, in quotes, Voice of the People on Google, and I count the number of hits. And that'll tell you how frequently Voice of the People pops up or whatever. Now, if you go Google right now, voice.com on Google on a browser, you will get 2.2 billion hits. Voice, not the .com, but just the word voice. Just Google voice. That's what I meant. Yeah. The word voice will get 2.2 billion hits. Yeah. What you'll see is that first tier words or first tier domains, in my opinion, get 1 billion or more hits on the word. If you Google Michael, you'll get 2 billion hits or something. If you Google William, if you Google Mike, you'll get 1 billion hits. If you Google Hope, you'll get more than 1 billion hits. If you Google words like Usher, you'll get 500 million hits, or you'll get in the hundreds of millions. When you start to go and Google esoteric names, you can Google companies that are $100 billion revenue companies around for 30 years, and you'll get 79 million hits.
Yeah.
And you'll fall below 100 million. You can Google $1 billion company, and you'll get 17 million hits. You'll get 7 million hits. And so, and what does that mean? Well, when you buy the word, or when you build your business on the domain, say voice, you're leaping ahead of 2.2 billion pages on the Google search engine. And so there's 2.2 billion other references in the Western world, and you're rising above them to the top, to the very tippy top, because not only are you going to get preferred by the Google search engine, voice.com goes to like the first page immediately. They didn't have, Lyft had to spend $1 billion marketing to actually crawl up to their level, and voice goes there immediately. And that's the first benefit. The second benefit is you don't need Google. Like as soon as I've had, here's a really great domain name, simple rule. I'm going to build a business. I'm going to put it on a domain. And if someone hears the name of my business for 1 second, they're going to be able to find it for the rest of their life. And if I can pass that 1 second rule, Michael, what's your charity? Hope? Yeah. Michael, you got a business that'll actually tell me, that'll save my life. What's it called? Alarm? Yeah. Michael, something, alert. Okay, like one word, 1 second, and I will bypass Google and remember it the rest of my life, because my 3rd grade teacher rapped my knuckles when I spelled it wrong. And so we're tapping into the zeitgeist of all of Western civilization with that brand. And if Google ever goes out of business, and if anybody ever decides they're just going to suppress you down to page 37 on the search results,
which is what they do, right?
And you can breathe. You have oxygen too.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. It's a snorkel, right? It's a snorkel in the ocean of Google. And, for lack of a better analogy, but that's exactly right. It's like, okay, you want to push me down? Well, all I got to do is market outside of you, and I got a direct, frictionless point of contact with my customers and potential customers.
Andrew, there's another word that comes to mind, which is pristine. People have described.
Oh, you know who owns Pristine.com?
Who?
Me.
Really?
Yeah, Pristine.com and Flawless.com.
Okay, you're my hero now. Yeah.
I was laughing because on your interview with Raul, he kept talking about, Bitcoin is the most pristine collateral on the planet, which I 100% agree with. And I was just laughing because, I think he said 15 times the word pristine between the two of you. And I was like, yes, Pristine.com.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful word, and it's relevant in how you think about domain names. Because when I tell you I have an offering like Google Voice, and the way you get to it is you type voice.google.com, or maybe you type google.voice.com, or maybe you type googlevoice.com, or maybe
it's google.com/voice,
and then when I create a sign, and the sign is like voice by Google or Google Voice, or it breaks that design rule, because there's something you could take away. When I just have the word voice.com, the way that the human mind works, and the way we've been conditioned is human beings, they suppress something which is constant in their environment, and they focus on the signal. The signal is voice. The .com is understood and expected.
And if you're anything but the .com, you are encumbering your brand
Sure.
because you cannot say my brand is voice because you're on voice.io. So your brand is voice.io or Get
You
Voice
are
or Try
odd.
Voice or Google Voice or whatever. You're encumbered. If you're
You're
not
odd.
the .com, you're encumbered.
Yeah, you're odd and confusing
Yes.
and dilutive. And
Yes.
so this is a mistake for Google. It's a massive mistake. A
Yes.
company with $100 billion in capital, and it's worth $1 billion to them to own the word voice.
Yeah.
and they're not, and they're oblivious to this because, first of all, they're just odd and confusing. They're confusing their customer. They're diluting their own brand. It undermines
100%.
Google.
Yes.
It's bad they're diluting $1 billion, $100 billion Google brand. They're diluting the voice brand, and they're imposing on their customers. And by the way, it's inadvertently the only way to get to Google Voice is to go through Google. And if I happen to use another search engine, like Microsoft's Bing or something like that, now they're at the mercy of other search engines, and
it's so silly. It really is. It's an ego thing. We've had a lot of interactions with Google and the way that they think about domain names. They just basically, their opinion is, we are Google. We don't need the domain. And my point is, well, the number one rule in e-commerce is you need to create the least amount of steps. I mean, I would love to know, how much did Amazon's revenues increase when they introduced the one-click buy? And the reason is because you reduce the amount of friction between what somebody's intent is and the outcome. And so if my intent is to find Google Voice and I have to go, okay, I go to Google, I type voice, now I see a link, I go to there, now I log into my account at Google, and then I'm presented with 100 icons and I got to go scroll through them and I click on voice. And it's like, it's as useless as, phone apps. It's like, well, phone apps were great when there was 4 apps on my phone. Now there's 100. And now I got to go, hey, Siri, can you find this app for me? Because I don't feel like scrolling through 7 pages of apps. You're just, you're diluting the brand. You're diluting the experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, it happens because they're engineers and maybe they didn't get their liberal arts degrees, because you got to ask, what would William Shakespeare say?
Yes.
Right? What's in a name? Right?
Yeah.
What's in a name? What would William Shakespeare say? What would any poet say? What would Virgil say? What would, any of them would be shuddering in their grave right now. But I get another kick out of it. I mean, can you imagine the hilarity of it when you're on Amazon Alexa trying to ask Alexa to get you a Google Voice account? Yeah. It just gets so complicated.
Yes.
So less the elegance of the word. That, by the way, people talk about, again, we talked about Bitcoin being pristine collateral, and a single word domain is a pristine domain. Bitcoin is sovereign immortality in cyberspace. It's the idea is you put something into into a cauldron of encrypted energy and it'll be there 100 years, pristine.
Yeah.
It's not going away. Well, a domain name,
digital sovereignty.
Digital sovereignty. It's sovereign. It's immortal sovereignty for your brand, and it's like I own the best restaurant in Manhattan, and I make $10 million a year, and I have this restaurant on Central Park, and everybody loves it, and then my landlord comes at the end of my lease and says, I see you're making $10 million a year. I read about it in the whatever journal, and so your rent just went up by $8 million. I'm going to leave you with $2 million of the cash flow. The other $8 million, hey, $2 million is better than nothing. And your choice is give up 50 or 75% of your cash flow. And by the way, they may be like, I'm just going to take it all. I mean, I liked what you're doing, $10 million a year, and so I'm setting up my yo-yo restaurant for $10 million a year. And you're out. And
you're out. People know where to find the food. They don't care who the owner is. You're out. Go, move to the Bronx.
Any good businessman or woman would look at this and It's like, you know it when you're 3 years old. You either know or you don't know. It's like, I'm going to invest all of my life's energy in building this business. I'm going to buy the dirt underneath my building if it matters. Right. If it doesn't matter, if you're selling insurance online, real estate in
Whatever.
the real world doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But if you're selling real insurance online, real estate in cyberspace matters a heck of a lot.
Sure does.
And so if some people got it early, right? Jeff Bezos got it 20 years ago. He figured it out. Other people figured it out a little bit later. Some people have figured it out, but then they screw it up. Like Google kind of got it with Google, but then they screwed it up with Google Voice. And now everybody in the world, is getting this lesson, post-pandemic. If you didn't quite figure out that you needed to sell and market and service all your stuff through your website, let us put it a different way. You're not allowed to do it any other way if you wanted to. And so maybe you didn't want to, maybe you didn't think you needed to. Welcome to the world of you don't have a choice.
As Mike Tyson so eloquently said, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. So this is a great segue. You said something, another great analogy that you made in the interview. I don't know if it was Pop or Ralph, but you said that Bitcoin, by the way, right? Big news, first CEO in the history of public markets to take your treasury and convert it into Bitcoin, right? Whether you like Bitcoin or don't like Bitcoin, that's a conversation better served on some of these other interviews you've done. But it's, for me, crystal clear, you understand it. And I think your track record of being ahead of the game on all of the things that we've already discussed here, right? You made the analogy that Bitcoin is the steel framing of this new economy, in the same way that builders who used to build with bricks and mortar in Europe or with wooden houses in the United States, and that was great until people wanted to go past 2 stories or 5 stories if you were stone or whatever it might be. But suddenly the invention of steel allows you to build a 100-story building. And that was a phenomenal analogy that really lit off a light bulb in my head. And, of course, the builders who build in brick and mortar, and of course, the builders who build in wood are going to push back and they say, well, this steel thing is untested and we don't think you should do that. It's like straight out of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Hank Rearden invents this new form of steel. It's an alloy. It's far more durable, safer, etc. But all the other guys that manufacture railroad ties say, oh, no, this is unproven. You can't do that. You can't do that. We got to get the government to ban that, right? But Bitcoin comes along and it completely disrupts this fiat world that we lived in, and in the same way that steel disrupted wood and bricks and mortar. And I heard that, and the light bulb that went off my head is, this guy's spot on. And the point that you forgot to mention is that steel framing needs a foundation to be built on, and exactmatchbrand.com is the bedrock foundation on which you can build that 100-story building. If you try to build a 100-story building on a foundation made of sand, you're not going to last very long. And I think that is an absolutely crystal clear analogy, because if you try to build Amazon on, try Amazon.com, go Amazon.com, Amazon.io, Amazon never gets to the point they are today. It doesn't happen. Is that, do you think that's a fair extrapolation of your analogy?
Yeah, I think it is a very, very good metaphor. A great domain name in the .com English sphere is like having clear ownership forever of one or more city blocks in Manhattan built on granite, right?
Granite.
The thing about Manhattan is it's not dirt, it's granite, right?
Yeah, granite.
It's bedrock. What you want is a rock solid foundation and a deed forever to that, and no one's going to take that away. the likelihood that someone is going to change the meaning of pristine in the next 100 years in the English language, or
Not
the
going to happen.
likelihood that they're going to change the connotation of hope for 1 billion people in the next 100 years, impossible. It's just not going to happen. So I think that all these businesses, as they all dematerialize their products and services, then all of their traditional sales, marketing, service storefronts, all of them dematerialized to cyberspace. If you want sovereignty in cyberspace, you must own your own domain. And of course, everybody gets the fact they got to own a domain. Just most of them have a garbagey bad one. By the way, I'll take one more example here, which is IBM. IBM must have spent billions of dollars marketing Watson.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody heard of Watson? Watson was the future of AI and the future of business intelligence and the future of everything for IBM. IBM never bothered to buy Watson.com.
I actually tried
for the
to
brand.
sell it to them, and they didn't want to buy it. It was like, I don't.
When I Google it, it's like a pharmaceutical company that owns, that doesn't use it, that's got a warehouse. And I thought, you guys spent you put billions of dollars of effort behind commercializing a product offering on a domain space that you don't own. And now you got to pay Google to get you to the top of the word in the search engine. It's like renting obscenely expensive real estate. It's just
here's one that's going to blow your mind. The remnants of the original John Paul Getty company is a real estate investment trust, publicly listed, called Getty Realty, and they own Getty.com. And they realized at some point that they don't really need it. Right? They're a real estate investment trust, and they're not really consumer facing. They've got, they've been operating at Getty Realty, and so they approached me and said, would you like to sell Getty.com for us, right? And it was obviously first thing that comes to mind, Getty Images. Massive company. I mean, these guys, it's like a monopoly on every image in the world.
Yeah, Getty needs that in cyberspace, and they would like to get 100 million people to go to Getty.
But according to them, they don't even want to make an offer. They just, no. And this is the stuff. This is why I love speaking to you, because, you get it, and you got it 20 years ago. You got it 25 years ago, right? It's like, and I'm trying to, this is what I do on a daily basis, try to understand, where is the disconnect? How is it that you understood this 25 years ago? And for you, it's so intuitive and clear. We have this conversation, we're preaching to the converted, but it's like, how can there be a disconnect from, this is so obvious? I think everything that you and I have said in this conversation is very difficult for somebody to dispute. And then you have somebody like Getty Images who says, we don't need Getty.com. Why would we need that? We're Getty Images. We don't need Getty.com. And by the way, there's so many other business units of Getty that isn't involved just in images, right? And it's like, no, we don't need that. And I don't even know how to argue with that person. How?
I think you just got to be part architect and part artist. You have to be a polymath, right? You have to understand about poetry and liberal arts, read Shakespeare, and you got to be an architect. You got to be an artist. Signage. You put a sign on the side of a building or whatever. What's a better sign? MicroStrategy or strategy? Strategy is a better sign. By the way, what's a better sign? Coca-Cola or Coke? If you put Coke on, it blocks. And if you look at a brand, you want 4 letters generally, because 4 letters is about the minimum you can have to be unique, but it's the maximum you can have to get a form factor, which in a split second burns into someone's brain. If you ever look, I look at boats. People name their boats. The second Marjorie Majesty of the Sea. And I'm like, by the time you write 47 characters on the side of the thing, it's 4-point font. I can't read it. Okay, so have you written, so I'd like to say, Andrew, you want to be a good marketer, but I think there are a lot of people in the marketing business that still think that misspelling a common word is good marketing idea. And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
there are a lot
First-hand
of
experience,
bad
I can tell you.
marketers, and they just don't have common sense. And I'll give you one more example. This is architecture. A very famous architect, who will remain nameless, but you would know his name, built a building at MIT and wanted to be unique. And so they built the building so it's all curvilinear. There's no classic forms. Like Howard Rourke would be going nuts about this, and in the Fountainhead. This architect, this newfangled architect, who's famous and rich and makes a fortune, builds this curvilinear building, and it's like, well, there's no straight lines through it, and there's no rectangular or square rooms in it, and nothing is ordinary, and it's odd, and it looks like spaceship, like space aliens excreted it from a blob. You go into the building, it's like, well, you can't find anything. And if you haven't been there, you can't make it to any room. So, so if you have 1 million people a year going in the building, everybody gets lost. And they're like, yeah, everybody gets lost here. We think it's everybody gets lost trying to find where they're going in the building. And then here's a better one, Andrew. I get lost because, of course, it does this, and it's odd. And the guy, with his intellectual arrogance, imposed this twisted thing on people because he was bored. Then I get into a conference room, and the conference room spins in a spiral. You ever been into a spiraling conference room that does this and look up? Okay, it causes vertigo, Andrew. So you walk into, but I can't make this shit up.
Yeah.
Pardon my friends. You can't make it up.
I swear more than anybody.
Architect designs a building where everyone gets lost when they try to meet there. And then when they go into the conference room, they get vertigo. And I'm not lying, you fall down on your head. You literally get vertigo and you fall down in the room. And so I look at the tour guide. I say, this is giving me vertigo. And they go, yeah, it used to be worse. So we had to come in and put these 4 large posts in the room to give people a frame of reference with furniture so that their inner ear wouldn't spin. And they paid money, a very wealthy person paid money to a very wealthy architect to do this, inflict this damage on people. Now, the reason that's not a non sequitur is that's what it's like to pick a bad domain.
It is.
Like, put your brand on a bad domain. You confuse everyone. They get lost. You give them vertigo. It's inflicting harm on your customer. And if you don't get the fact that people get lost and fall down when they try to come and do business with you, then I just can't explain it, right? I give up, right? Like, it should. The best way to communicate to people probably is you start to show them that in the modern era, when you type their domain, they get spell checked out. I can't ask for your thing, even if I wanted to, because it doesn't work on speech recognition. I can't type it in. You get spell checked out. Nobody, put a focus group of 100 people together, guys, and ask them whether they can remember and use your brand in 1 second. And if the answer is yes, it's a good domain. And if the answer is no, stop giving me all these legal. By the way, what is it? Every one of these guys with a bad domain and a bad brand, it's because they're cheap. And every one of them.
That's all it is. That's all it is.
Hundreds of millions of dollars marketing and giving their money for Super Bowl ads and stupid magazine ads. And they spend it with, count the amount of money they spend with Google and Facebook. If you have to spend money with Google and Facebook on marketing, it's probably because your domain was weak. And if your domain was stronger, your advertising budget would probably be falling through the floor because you have repeat return customers. And
this is exactly at the heart of my thesis on what the value of a domain name is. What you're trying to establish is what is the cost of customer acquisition and how are you reducing the cost of customer acquisition over a reasonable business multiple? And therein lies your value, right? There's some brand equity, but it's about reducing your cost of customer acquisition and the repetition of that customer. It's not, once you acquire a customer with a Google ad, you got them to your website once. And if you have a bad domain name and your brand doesn't match your domain name, then you got to spend that same amount of money to get them back. But if you got a sticky domain name, which is intuitive to your customer, whether you bought them the first time or they came to you organically the first time, they're sticky and they're there for life. You don't need to keep ingraining the brand into their mind. It was a household name day one.
Now, there's one more point that's worth making here, because you're jogging me, you're triggering me again. You make me think things I haven't thought in a long time, because you're in the business and I just happen to have had a passion for the business at a point.
Yes.
Word of mouth. But it's not just that a good domain name will help your customers come back to you. It's a good domain name will allow your customers to tell their friends to come to you.
Yes.
Yeah. If you want to go viral, and if you want to spread through the ecosystem via word of mouth, if you want people,
the most powerful marketing in the world, by the way.
You want your customers to send a text message to their friends to go to you. You want them to type it in their Twitter. You want them to tell people when they talk. Before we had cyberspace, we used to use the sonic net, the sound net. We talk to each other, and hopefully we will do that again sometime soon. And so when you actually brand yourself with a domain that you can't spell, and it gets me to an interesting point, which we didn't touch on, which is when I say the word, it needs to be unique if you hear it. And so that's the problem with lift. I really love, if I have a word and there's 16 different
spellings, variations
for it, but they all sound the same, then it doesn't travel via audio in a unique fashion.
We call that the radio test. In the domain world, we call it the radio test. If you hear it on the radio, do you know how to spell it? Do you know which version it is? And if it doesn't pass the radio test, it's not a good domain, period.
So it all comes down to, if you got a great domain, it's going to hit on a resonating frequency across all of these communication mechanisms. And that resonating frequency might very well be 1 million times more resonant, right?
Yeah.
Than your other idea. So
agreed.
We could conclude that in general, our view is that this has been left to the domain of marketers for the past 20 years, and CEOs didn't get as involved. I mean, the idea that a CEO would delegate to a head of marketing, would delegate to a brand marketing picking agency. And by the way, I've hired them in the past, Andrew. I've never had a good idea or a good brand name proposed to me by someone that does brand name picking for a living.
Yes.
They always picked awful ones that would not resonate, that would not travel, because they wanted to be unique.
Unique. For the same reason that your architect built that awful building.
Unique,
Yeah.
And instead, and that's why, and so then we get to the good news. The good news is, in the year 2020, every CEO knows they have to rebuild their brand, their product, and for the virtual era. You have to rewrap your product and sell it virtually, not through a storefront. And that means they're taking over that job from the CMO. And every CMO has figured out that they better be able to sell their stuff off their domain. And then the last piece of good news is there's a lot of good domains with great names that have not been commercialized. And there's an opportunity for these companies that have $1 billion plus brands to come and commercialize on $1 billion plus domains. We didn't touch on it, but I didn't want to sell voice for 30 million. I thought it was worth a lot more. I'd rather.
I agree.
I think it's worth $1 billion. Just
all
like
of
all
these
these
domains
words. They're
it's all the market and the price. The delta between the market and the price is at least an order of magnitude, possibly 10 orders of magnitude. I think when it's all said and done in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, when the entire world has been dematerialized and is now living in the ether, one of these names is, as you said, a block on the park in Manhattan. And what is that worth, right? What is that? What is that building worth? 121 Park Ave.
Andrew, that's not even a strong enough metaphor, because it's more like having a block in the center of every town on earth, and every town that's ever going to get constructed until the human race decides to abandon English.
Yeah.
And that, 1,000 years from now, if they abandon English and they've given up all hope, Andrew, when they no longer have hope, when that's no longer important, hope won't be important. So I think you can look out 1, 2, 3, 400 years to every place on earth, and you can say, if you have a good word, a pristine word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that word is, and people continue to function, then that will be valuable. And it's not an asset that can be impaired by a municipal politician or policy, a state policy, a federal policy, a global policy. A lot of real estate's impaired assets right now for this reason or the other. But cyberspace is cyberspace, and it's a different thing, and it's a magical thing, right? You can create magical, like Getty Images. They ought to be selling, or someone like them, they ought to be selling art digitally into 1 billion households at $10 a month, and it ought to be $100 billion a year business selling digital art rights to display your art on your wall. And that's just going to sit on art.com, right? Or probably art.com is better than Getty.com for that matter.
I think art.com is one of the 3 to 5 most valuable domains in the world.
Yeah, so we're united.
We see eye to eye
in this interest.
I want to be conscious of your time, but there are so many topics still that I'd love to dive into, but we'll have to bring you back on, unless you want to continue. I'm happy to go as long as you want to go. But there's the whole concept of.
We can wrap up any in the next 10 minutes if you like.
There's this whole concept of the decentralized DNS, which is sort of ties in with Bitcoin and crypto, and we're decentralizing money, we're decentralizing sovereignty, and it makes sense to me that the DNS, the root zone, should ultimately maybe be decentralized. There's problems with sort of these mechanisms for dispute. Once you got it, if there's no mechanism to dispute and somebody's got a trademark and they've got legitimate rights and interest into that name and they missed the boat, whatever, there should be some mechanism. I'm not sure how you solve that governance problem, but there's a lot of smarter people than me working on it. Are there any other existential threats that you can think of to domains? And even more importantly, being early in everything you've done, what can you think of even just one use case for domain names? Because I believe the utility of domain names is going to expand exponentially. I think that it's going to be geofencing, it's going to be identifying physical objects in the digital world, just in the way that it identifies a company in the digital world now. I think the whole pseudo-anonymous, society will move, will be represented through domain names. But are there any utilities that you can imagine? Have you thought about this at all? On commercialized utilities for domain names in the future?
I'm not terribly concerned about the underlying ownership mechanics of domain names right now and the need for decentralization. I think it may grow as an issue over time, but the body of law is pretty settled, and I don't see they have the same kind of regulatory uncertainty and ambiguities that are threatening to certain other businesses.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately, what's missing is we need a lot more education for rank and file executives, the CEOs, and the CMOs of the world and the investors. I think that for the most part, people just they don't understand it. And the number one thing we can do is educate them. I remember talking to people 10 years ago. I talked to people on Wall Street about Apple stock or Apple, and they just wanted to, they're always like, well, Apple, well, as soon as it goes up, we're going to sell it and buy some HP and IBM. So you don't have too much exposure to Apple. And their entire businesses, and they existed to sell tech when it got to be too much of your portfolio and sell Apple when it got to be too much of tech. And they thought that was value added. And there's a lot of conventional thinking like that. And of course, eventually Apple became the most valuable company in the world because it ate everything else. Yes. And that's what I told them. They ignored me. I wrote the book. They didn't read the book. Read the book. It says in 2012, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google are going to eat the world. Just read the book. Nobody reads books anymore. What I learned here, Andrew, is if you kind of understand the future, you have an opinion, if you have a conviction, don't bother to write the book. No one's going to read it. Just buy all the stuff that you can buy, right? And then tweet about it. And then maybe and create educational content on YouTube and let let the 1 hour, 2 hour, half hour content circulate. And then all of the people that have been completely closed to this idea, at some point it clicks in their mind, oh, art.com. By the way, the most valuable use of any domain is not to sell something on the domain. I mean, if you look at the stack of hierarchy, it's if I do 100,000 transactions a year on art.com, well, selling something, that's something. If I'm a holding company of art, it's worthless. It's not that valuable, right? That's the holding company. I sell the art, it's retail, it's more valuable. If on the other hand, I let people share art, or if I load up all of John Singer Sargent's library and I get the digital rights from the museum that owns it, and I let anybody put John Singer Sargent on their 55 or 85 inch big screen television and pay me $1 a month or $10 a month for the Spotify we need the Spotify of art, right? And I put that on art.com, that gets more valuable. And then if I let artists paint their own art, upload their digital image to art.com, and I'm like the YouTube of art, and then I can discover unique art like I can discover unique music, and then I create an art playlist and I can share it for $9 a month. Well, I mean, there's a billion people in the world that would like art, and I got to tell you, I got walls with 80-inch super high def screens, and they're showing beautiful art. And to me, I think I have taste. I appreciate it as much and more so than if you gave me the real thing, because I can change my art to suit my mood, and I can flip through 1,000 masterpieces. Just like nobody wants to have the band Led Zeppelin play for them every morning for breakfast. What they want is Spotify or Amazon Music or Apple Music play whatever they want every morning for breakfast through high def speakers. So as I stack up these domains, when I have little creativity and little vision, I see art is just, okay, it's worth 25 grand. And when I imagine art.com as the YouTube of art, and by the way, for me, I pay $10 a month to YouTube because I don't want the ads. Right. So when I imagine 1 billion people getting art streaming at $10 a month, and I think about $10 billion a month, and I think about 100 billion a year, and I imagine myself keeping 20 billion of it, and therefore I got $20 billion a year, and I put a 20 multiple on that. And what's 20 times 20 billion? 400 billion. When I imagine $400 billion built on this little word called art, then I start to see the potential of it. Now, though, what's in a word? You got to have the word. The rest of the execution is quite hard, right? As we know, it's not enough to just do this. But if I was the head of marketing,
just as hard or harder on another domain, right? So take the apples to apples right? You're going to do the work, whether it's on art.com or, try myart.com or subscribe to art.com, whatever it is, work is the same or harder on anything but art.com. And so it's, take that out of the equation. You got to do the work, right? You got to make the investment. You got to build the business, but the underlying asset is not the same, right? Your outcome is not going to be the same. This is a great sort of segue into just sort of glimpsing into the future. Extrapolate this idea out. And it's where I believe, the concept of Bitcoin or crypto is dovetailing with the domain names and decentralization. And, it's look at the trends in investments, right? So now you have micro shares. You can take a slice of a share, right? And you've got, fractional ownership of collector cars, fractional ownership, through something like Rally Road. And you got fractional ownership of masterpiece art through masterworks.io, right? And there's more of these companies popping up. You get a fractional ownership of a Michael Jordan jersey. Now let's take that concept and apply it to commercial assets in the same way. Sam Zell basically, commercialized the idea of a real estate investment trust, right? To centralize the ownership of the world's most important commercial assets, share the equity among these people, and unlock the value of the asset itself into exponentially greater economic benefit, right? And I think the same can be applied to domain names. I think the same will be applied to domain names in the same way that real estate investment trusts, were created. I think there will be some form of that. These domain names are ultimately going to become so valuable that so very few people will own a whole domain name. In the same way that Bitcoin is going to become so valuable, if our thesis, which I share with you, by the way, for full disclosure, I am a shareholder of MicroStrategy. I don't think I even told you that, but I believe in your vision, and I am a shareholder of MicroStrategy. But in the same way that very few people a decade from now, certainly 2 decades from now, will own a full Bitcoin, it's a reserve asset in which that enables tremendous economic benefit to be built on top. A domain name will become so valuable that it will be fractionally owned and leased, or some other mechanism be utilized by a commercial entity or a decentralized entity, who knows what it'll be in 20 years. But some entity will commercialize it and create economic benefit that some portion will dribble down to the people who have the equity in the underlying asset. I think that all of these things that are the first layer, the underlying asset of the various classes of commercialization, I just can't imagine a world in which they're not going to go up parabolically over the next 20 years as we, go full tilt into this dematerialization of the world.
Well, I think it's reasonable to think of them as a new asset class, and like commercial real estate was an asset class, and domains are a cyber asset class, and you'll do whatever with those assets as you would do with the physical complements of them. You've triggered me to think that, a really great domain is the central node in a network. And so
100%.
Most valuable domains are going to be the principal central node in a network of art, or a network of video, or a network of search or information, or a network of retail, or whatever it is. And so
Except to take it down one more layer, this is actually the base layer network, right? This is the network of everything.
It's the key. Yeah, it's the keystone. And so
yes,
and the world's going to have more networks, right? I mean, every successful tech company is in essence, it's in essence a technology network that has dematerialized a product, a service, or an idea. And so as we see the dematerialization of more things, these networks will grow in time, and then
multiply.
The value of the underlying domain will accrete, and then the elegance of the domain name will drive the friction the effectiveness of that brand and that network. And if it's a bad domain,
it'll be proportional.
Friction, and some domains are so crippling as you won't be able to build a network. Other domains, you can do it on that domain, but it's going to be a lot more risky and a lot more expensive. And some domains are going to work great. And I guess that's probably our best note to end this on.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me on your podcast, Andrew. I appreciate it.
This was a great conversation, and I hope I can convince you to come back on. I'm going to go back through this interview, and there are so many topics that we could have dove, further into, and segues and rabbit holes. I think we've got close to 2 hours, and it's I feel like we've just skimmed the surface. But I think that was an excellent note to end on. I think that we see eye to eye on all things dematerialization, and it's an exciting future. And I think, my hat is off to you. I think you are, paving the way. I loved your analogy, just as a closing note, you made an analogy about being, everybody thought it was impossible to run a 4-minute mile until the first guy did it. And one of the guys that joins me often on this show, Shane Coltra, will appreciate this. He's a competitive runner. And it's like, you were the first guy to break the 4-minute mile in terms of, the treasury conversion to Bitcoin. And I think the floodgates are now open, and I don't think it'll be long before there's a bunch of other people running behind you. So my hat is off to you. This is what leadership and innovation is all about. People need to take bold moves with conviction, and just ignore the haters, ignore the people that don't understand. You got people say, well, he's going to sell all that Bitcoin. And I'm laughing. I'm like, man, somebody offered this guy $22 million for his domain name. And he said, look, I'll get on the phone with you. Right. And eventually it was at 30 million. It was like, all right, just, I'll let you pull it out of my hands. Right. You got strong hands on the domains. I imagine it's going to be strong hands in the Bitcoin. And I think that your thesis is correct. And I'm excited to come along for the ride.
Yeah, I would leave all your viewers with the thought that, I sold Voice for $30 million because I felt like we needed to put a peg in the market to set it.
Yes.
But it's worth $1 billion.
Yes.
These domains are $1 billion assets.
100%.
I did the early one. I'm like the guy that sold the first Picasso, so that people would know that Picasso is art, but I've got the vault of the other Picassos.
Yeah.
And I would rather commercialize them for 100x the money. And This is kind of a wake-up call, hopefully, that people will realize that domains are insanely valuable. And if you're still
insanely valuable.
For everybody that's spending the billions of dollars on Google and Facebook advertising because their domain is weak, they might want to repurpose some of that energy to do it the right way. And with that, thanks. I had more fun on this one. I haven't talked about this subject with anybody for years and years and years. So it's nice to meet a kindred spirit, and all the best to you guys.
I saw your passion, in some of these interviews, just in talking about domain names, and I said, I got to have a conversation with this guy. So thank you. And I think our audience will thank you as well. And thank you for putting that peg in the market and, giving us a ring up to lift the market to. And now it's my job to, take it to the $100 million level. And then, in a few years, it'll be, 500 million. And then, 15 years, it'll be $1 billion.
Andrew, I give you the baton.
Thank you. I take it with pleasure.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Michael.
We'll see you next time, I hope.
I'm sure.